Hey there, in today's video we are getting back to basics and just talking about substrates. And by that I mean anything and everything that you can put paint on, or marker, or charcoal, or soft pastel, whatever it is that is your choice of a medium. I gathered them all together and it's just kind of talked you through the things that I love to use, and hopefully you will find a new favorite, or you might even have some ideas for me of something that I hadn't even thought to mention. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this video and thanks for watching. I'm going to start by talking about a very common substrate, which is the art journal, which many people also refer to as a sketchbook. And the reason I call mine an art journal is because I use it more for mixed media or wet materials, and I think of a sketchbook as something that you would use dry materials in, because typically the paper is more lightweight. So you would use pencils or charcoals or something like that. So for example, I'm going to pull over, I have a sketchbook over here. It is 60 pound, which is quite a bit, the paper is quite a bit thinner. I'm not saying you couldn't use water or wet materials on it. You would just have a different effect. I need something really solid and sturdy. So I tend not to use a sketchbook as often, but I would, recommend giving it a try. I have several sketchbooks. Let me see. I think I have another one over here. This one, similar size. This one is the same weight, I think. Yeah, 60 pound. So these are a great alternative as something to try, but I tend not to gravitate towards those because the paper is much more lightweight. If you typically use more of a dry material, a soft pastel, a charcoal, or pencils, things like that, these would be perfectly fine. And I think you get more pages for the amount of money, that you spend. So definitely something to consider. So anyway, that's the way I think of it. I think of these as sketchbooks, and certainly it's called sketchbooks. The ones I typically use are for mixed media paper, and the weight is how you know the difference. So this typically would be over, and I'm trying to see what I painted this cover. So obviously I'm stuttering over my words here. But this one is a 98 pound or 160 GM. I think it's GSM, I don't know, what the European word for that. And this one is 120 pounds, so really much more heavy duty. So I tend to like those art journals that have a heavier paper weight so they can take the abuse that I'm going to give them, because typically I am scratching and marking and painting and layering and all this stuff. So you can just kind of see. This isn't a sketchbook tour, but it's more just to talk about the substrates. So this one is obviously much smaller. This is a 9x12, and I do like working in 9x12 size. I like this size the best. I feel like it gives me a large surface. I am moving away from the ring. So I probably have almost 10 years of ringed art journals, mixed media paper, and not this brand. I typically have used I'm trying to think what the brand is called, Canson, I think. And then I decided, I'll try a different brand here at the end. But now I've decided I want to get away from the ring binding altogether. So those are just things to consider. Do you want the ring binding, which is fine? What I find is I do not work on the other page. If the ring binding wasn't here, I probably would. So I feel like I'm losing a whole other page just because I don't work on the left-hand side. Maybe if I was left-handed, it would work. I just find that I just only work on the right side, right page. So you have to find an art journal, or, in this case, I'm talking about substrates in general, but I'm spending a little bit of time on the art journal just so that you can kind of think about what you like if you were to invest in getting an art journal. So the next thing I'm doing, once I use up my ring bound ones, because I am frugal and I will not just get rid of them just for the sake of it, but I have one at the ready. And this one is not ring bound, and I'm hoping it works across both pages. I can already see when I lay it flat, it doesn't quite flat, so I may have to use clips to hold it down. But I'm looking forward to I feel like I'm going to use both sides, maybe even do the whole thing. I don't really know. This one is, what size is this? This is 10 and a half by 8.5. So it's a little bit smaller than, the 9x12, but I think it's fine. I do like a big one. And so you just have to kind of find what size and what type works for you. Do you like the ring binding? Do you want it to lay flat? there's just a lot of things to consider when you are looking at an art journal, or do you want a sketchbook because you're going to do something not using such heavy paints. So these are some things to consider. Now, another interesting substrate that I use in lieu of a art journal, and I still call them my art journals, are art journals that I have actually made myself. And I have videos on each one of these. This is a art journal that I made out of a children's board book. This is a art journal that I used papers, and you do not have to sew it. It's called a no-sew art journal. And then this is an art journal that I made out of an old book. So I couldn't tell you what the weight of the papers is. Obviously, a children's board book is super heavy. I used watercolor paper in here, which is a pretty heavy paper. And the book paper is not heavy, but I put a lot of paint and gesso and things on it and collage. So it eventually the paper becomes heavy, or, it's fragile. These are old books that I'm using. So all three of these are another form of art journal that you can make yourself and turn, papers or books that you have already on hand without having to actually go and purchase them. And I will link the videos for how to make these below. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about are your very, very typical substrates that you think about a lot, which is canvas. So this is tricky to see. I'm going to set this aside. This is called a canvas board. You can see it's just a board, and then you would paint on it and frame it. It's pre-primed with gesso. Typically, when you buy them, canvases at the store, just wherever, craft art store or Michael's or wherever, they come in packages that are pre-gessoed. Not always, but a lot of times. So anyway, you can just buy a board, which is much more inexpensive than buying the full edge canvas, because those have wood and all kinds of things behind them, and then just frame that yourself, or use it for whatever purpose. Okay, so then the next thing I have here, I meant to grab some smaller ones because these are pretty big, are just your regular canvas. Now, there are the thin edge canvases, which is kind of the canvases that I began using when I first started painting, because they are so much more inexpensive. So it's a really great alternative to the deep edge canvases when you're getting started, because you don't really know. And also, these can be popped in a frame and look just fabulous. So that is also the benefit of the thin edged price, and then also it can fit nicely into what I now use primarily, not necessarily the Blick brand, but I use what's called a high, well, I think, this one says gallery profile. It's like an inch or inch and a half. And a lot of my paintings, I do not frame. And so they hang on the wall. I paint the edges black, and then they just kind of blend into the wall. And that's one less thing. I put a wire across the back, and then they're ready to go. So framing can be very expensive, and so that is one reason, to me, it's worth it to invest a little bit more in my canvas versus then have to deal with framing later, because that is a whole nother beast, and that just can be very tricky to find the right frame and to figure that all out. And so I have just opted to use the thicker edged canvases. The other thing I wanted to mention was these birch panels. This also has a thick edge. I've just kind of gone over it with black gesso because I was doing something else with it, but I wanted to mention it. The nice thing about these wood panels are that they take a beating as well. They can be scratched into. You can use encaustic. You can use all kinds of materials on them, and they hold up really well. The canvas is going to be a little spongier because on the back, even though it's framed very nicely around the edge, you are going to have soft spots. You can see, well, I don't know if you can see that, but so I put my canvases through a lot of abuse in terms of scraping and using very harsh materials on it, but the boards work a lot better. Now, I will say the boards are much more expensive again, and so a lot of times what I have done is used old leftover ones that have quotes, and I've just painted over the top of them. In fact, this could be one of those, so that I'm not starting with a brand new piece, because on the wood, I don't need it to be perfect. Another thing that I have used, and I was going to show this later, but I think I'll show it now, is along the same lines. This is just a piece of plywood, and we had made some event, and he'd made a whole bunch of these, and I was like, oh, I should figure out what to do with them. And I still haven't quite figured out. I did put a layer of plaster on this one, and I did just a wash of color over the top. I'm still not sure what I want to do. I think I have about 40 of them. And so I need to figure out how to do that. These would, I guess you could somehow hang them like this. I don't really know. I think they need to go in a frame. Something would need to happen. But it's another alternative. If you have random pieces of wood laying around, why not use those? And then you can figure out what to do with them or how to hang them or what to do, what exactly happens down the road. You don't have to decide all of that right now. It's just another great substrate to use in terms of, what you're painting on. Okay, so there's also just sheets of paper. So for example, this is watercolor paper. I don't do this a lot, although I kind of have an idea in mind that I'm gonna just rip out a bunch of papers and do some random work on just paper instead of always working either in my art journal or on a canvas. So this would be a great resource for that. And I just this is hot press. I know there's cold press and hot press, and I'm not really sure about the differences in that. I don't use watercolor paper that much, but I do know it's great for using all types of media, not just watercolor. And then I had this other smooth Bristol. I'm not really sure, but it's a 90 pound. So, I would just look around, like different types of paper that you can find and that you can use that you have sitting around. These are ones that are more on the art level, but I'm sure there's just anything you can use. So, for example, you could use your, computer paper, just type, paper from your printer. Any kind of paper that you have is definitely, in my opinion, worth giving a try because you just don't know how the result's going to be or maybe what you're going to use it for. Okay, lastly, I have a batch of weird items I wanted to talk to you about or show you because I want you to think outside the box. This is a piece of fabric that I put clear gesso over. And I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with it, but I could do a little painting. I could use it I could stitch on it. I don't really know, but I like the idea of using fabrics. So I prepped some pieces and I thought, I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see what it's like to put paint on them. I'm going to see what it's like to maybe even just use charcoal or to collage it. I just don't know where this is going to go. But do not overlook, I'm making this up, but like an old pillowcase or something that you could just rip apart and then put some gesso on and see what happens. I know a lot of people use tissue paper, and there are specific art grade tissue papers. I think it's called, no, I'm not sure what it's called. Doesn't bleed or something. But this is just regular tissue paper. I don't use it a lot, but I see people using it in their art, and I think it gives a great result. I use, instead of tissue paper, although, like I said, I think I've seen it used and it's a great idea. So this you could paint on and use in collage or whatever. I tend to use deli paper, and because it's a little sturdier, and I think the artist grade tissue paper is a little bit sturdier. And so this works great for me. I often clean my brush off on this. And it's great in collage, and it's so thin. It just works out great. It's thin, but it's also sturdy. Another thing not to overlook is all your random book papers and music papers or whatever you have. Like I have a book falling apart, and these pages I often will also clean my brush off on, and then I can make them into cards or collage or all kinds of different things. So do not overlook random book paper. Another thing on the same line of books, which I love books. So I have old books that that have fallen apart. This one I actually cut in half. These are great little substrates. They're very sturdy, and you could leave the back the way it is. You could leave the front and then paint on the back, so you have this cool back. You can do it however you want. It could be the front and the back, or the back and the front, and it's a nice, sturdy, and cool-looking substrate to use in your art. And you can incorporate these words. You can do so many things with them. So I'm just saying, look around. You may have substrates that you can use right out of the gate that you do not have to go and buy. You can just use what you have. Another thing I like is the thin cardboard. Now you can also use from your boxes that you get deliveries, but I really like, this is similar to the weight of something on the back of a pad of paper. And I like this weight because I can actually use it with my rotary cutter or my blade. So I really like these kind of papers, or I can collage on them and then, you know, cut them to that right size. Or they also would probably be a fine substrate on their own, and then you could frame it if you wanted. This is a great size. Okay, this is literal cardboard, which I thought was so cool because it's black. It came in a package, and I was like, oh, you know, there's some perforations. I could almost, I don't know, I like the black. So like, again, any kind of cardboard is a great substrate. And I get that it's not archival because, and a lot of these things I'm talking about right now are not archival. But I will tell you, I have been to many museums and different places and galleries where you see art on, old art on substrates like cardboard, like books, a myriad of different things that are not archival. So, I mean, I'm not looking to my art to last, you know, 1,000 years or 500 years or even 100 years. So I'm not super worried about it. If you are, then obviously you wouldn't be using any of these substrates. But if you're not super worried about it, and obviously, like I said, I've seen it in museums where 100 years later, the art is still surviving, you know, you could give it a try. So this is cardboard. The other thing is your grocery bag. If you mind, you know, sometimes they give plastic, but if you have option for paper, I like to cut. I love to use these, and they are great as a substrate. They're great ripped into strips for collage. There are just so many things you can do with it. It's a nice heavy paper, and I just love a good grocery bag. So this is something also to consider. Now, last I wanted to bring up this. This I just got in a package. And I thought I was like, oh, it's thinner than the garbage sack, or the grocery bag. But it's that craft color that I really like. And I thought, I think I might save this and use this because it's so thin. I think it would collage very nicely. And I don't know. I don't typically, I would have just put it straight into the recycling bin, but I thought, I might keep this and see what I can do with it. So as you can see, there are so many different substrates you can use. Some are, you know, will cost more than others, but look around and see what you have. And I am sure I would love to hear if you have other ideas for substrates, because I am always like, what else can I use? What can I paint on? What can I make and turn into something? So if you have some other ideas, I would love to hear them. And I hope this has inspired you to just put your paint on whatever substrate that you have. You do not have to have anything expensive to make art and to be creative. So go out and get your grocery bag or your cardboard and start making art. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.